yet. Tonight, shiur Lilu Nishmat Avi Mori Dober Meri Bermuan Halevi Imi Maroti Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And tonight we are actually going to talk really about one pasuk. That's it. Tonight's shiur is all one pasuk. So, but that's only one pasuk from this week's parsha. I shouldn't say it's only one pasuk. We're going to have pasukim from other parshas. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of parshanim tonight in terms of trying to understand this pasuk. And why can't I see anything? Why is my screen doing this? Here we go. Okay. And the parsha Vayaytzay, first and foremost, one of the interesting things as a Balkari, you always notice these things, is the entire parsha Vayaytzay is one parak in the Torah, no breaks throughout. And we're going to try to talk a little bit about that. The Parshanim seem to talk a little bit about that, or at least the concept of a parsha stuma, meaning a closed parsha. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And the story, we all, I guess, again, as I said, with most of the story, most of the parsha and Bereshis, we're familiar with the storyline. Basically, we have Yaakov leaving home, going to Lavan, spending 20 years there, and coming home. In between, he has four different wives. He has 12 children. Not the 12 tribes, only 11 of the 12 tribes are born in this week's parsha. There's a 12th child, daughter Dinah, who is born. And we read about his challenges of dealing with Lavan. But I wanted to focus really on the first pasuk of the parsha. First pasuk of the parsha, very simple pasuk, it seems. Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva, Yaakov leaves Beersheva, Vayelech Charana, and he travels to Haran. Seemingly a very innocuous pasuk. Pretty straightforward, right? But the first question we have to ask is we have to go back to the last 5 psukim of last week's parsha to try to understand what the Torah is trying to tell us. So if we go back to last week's parsha, firstly, we find out perhaps why Yaakov is leaving. We know that Rivka, upon overhearing that Esav would like to kill Yaakov, for, quote, stealing his bracha, Rivka says to Yaakov in Perek Chavzayin Pasuk Mem Gimel Ve'atav Shma B'Koli, and now speaking to Yaakov, she said, listen to me, V'kum V'rach Lacha, and get up and run away El Lavan Achi Harana, to my brother Lavan to Haran. So she very simply tells Yaakov, go, run away. V'rach Lacha, clearly run. Get away from Esav. Find a place to hide for a few years. He'll come down, and then he come back. But Rivka doesn't stop there. The parsha tells us that Rivka then goes and tells Yitzchak, Yaakov's been hanging around these years. We know Esav's wives Yitzchak and Rivka were not happy with Esav's choice of wives. The Torah tells us that. And Rivka says to Yitzchak, I think it's time for Yaakov to go get married. He's got to get married. So Yitzchak calls Yaakov in Perek Chavchet, which I've here put down, by Yivarech Oto. Now he gives him a bracha. Interestingly enough, he calls him and he gives him a bracha. And then by Yitzaveu Vayomer Lo, he commands him and tells him, Lo tikach isha mibnot Canaan. Do not take a wife from among the women of the daughters of Canaan. How are you going to avoid taking a wife from the daughters of Canaan? Again, very interesting, he uses the same word, kum. Same word that Rivka says, get up. Lech Padan Aram, go to Padan Aram. Doesn't say Haran, but Padan Aram and Haran seem to be synonymous. Seem to be two different descriptions of the same place. Beita Betuel Avimecha. Now, as opposed to the story we read a couple weeks ago with Avram, who just tells his Eved, not Eliezer. We generally say Eliezer, and I always do that, whether was he Eliezer or not, but he tells the Evet just to go to the general neighborhood. He doesn't sell him specifically to a specific place. He says, go to the neighborhood. But here, Yitzchak specifically tells Yaakov to go to Beita Betuel Avimecha v'kachel chamisha mishavim not Lavan achimecha. He tells specifically, go find a wife among the family of Lavan. So we have two reasons why Yaakov is leaving. He's leaving because his mother told him to leave. He's leaving because his father told him to leave. His mother told him to leave because she doesn't want Esav to kill him. His father told him to leave because he wants him to find a wife. Okay, very nice. By the way, the two psukim that those three dots represent are the bracha that Yitzchak gives Yaakov, that he will inherit, if you will, or he will carry on the legacy of Avraham, and he will be the one who the blessings of Avraham of inheriting Eretz Israel are to be transferred to exclusively, not to Esav, but exclusively to Yaakov. And Yitzchak clearly gives him that bracha in verses 3 and 4, which I've omitted here because that's not the focus right now. Vayishlach. Now, here's the strange part of the story here, okay? So Yitzchak, Vayishlach Yitzchak at Yaakov. Yitzchak sends Yaakov. Vayelech Padan Aram, and he goes, leads to Padan Aram. Elavam b'Btul Aramiach Yivkaim Yaakov v'Esav. Now, the next two pasukim interrupt that story and tell us about the next pasuk. Excuse me, that's hey, pasuk Vav tells us something about Esav, and then in pasuk Zayin suddenly it says Vayishma Yaakov el Aviv el Imo vayelech Padan Aram. Didn't we just read that in pasuk Hey? Why does the Torah repeat it? And then to go back two pasukim later, and at the beginning of our parsha, it once again says Vayaytzay Yaakov Yershol, but this time it's not vayelech Padan Aram, vayelech Haran. Why does the Torah say 3 different times that Yaakov leaves to go to Padan Aram, or even goes to Padan Aram? Vayelech, he already goes. Okay, so that's what I'm going to try to focus on. One of the things. And the second question is, why does the Torah add Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva this time? And the first time it doesn't say, it just says get up and go, and he gets up and he goes. It doesn't tell us where he's leaving from, where he's going, how long he stays, whatever. So those are some of the questions that I'm going to hopefully address in the next, I guess, whatever it is, time we have allotted tonight. So let's start again, as I said, with the pasuk that we begin with is Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva. Oh, by the way, there's a 4th time it says Vayelech. Now we know that the next pasuk after this tells us how he reaches a place and he has this wonderful dream about ladders and angels and climbing up and what have you. And then at the end of that story, 1 chapter later, it's only a chapter, it's not a chapter in the Torah, it's in the same parsha in the Torah, 1 chapter later as the Torah is divided by, number 28, 29, whatever, it says, Vayisa Yaakov Raglov, again, he lifts up his feet. Vayelech Artz of Kedem. Now here he's not going to Padan Aram or Haran, but he is going to Padan Aram and Haran, which are the same thing. But here it calls Vayelech Artz of Kedem. So 3-4 times it tells us that Yaakov is going in this sequence. Okay, so we're going to start first by trying to understand the chronology of Yaakov, only because that will help give us some insight, perhaps, into the story. We're going to start with the Alshich, who says the following. He starts with with raising all those questions. Why you have all these different times, and again, we have to understand the chronology of Yaakov's life. Now, the Gemara in Megillah tells us that Yaakov is 63 years old at the time he receives the bracha. Where does it get that number from? Makes it up out of whole cloth? The answer is yeah, it sort of does. But if we look at the psukim that I left out, one of the psukim tells us that Esav, the two tells us Esav listens to his father telling Yaakov not to marry from the Canaanite daughters, and he decides to go take a wife from the daughters of Yishmael. Okay, look, Yaakov going to his paternal uncle, so Esav goes to his paternal uncle. He goes to Yishmael and decides he's going to marry Yishmael's daughter Machala. That's what she's called in the parsha. But it says, it's very strangely, the Torah says, Vayikachet Machalat bar Yishmael, she's daughter Yishmael, Achot Nevayot, the sister of Nevayot. Now, Nevayot, we know from the end of Parshat Chayesara, is Yishmael's oldest son. Yishmael, Nevayot, Kedar, 12 other sons are listed there. And Rashi and the Gemara, the Megillah basically says, why do you have to tell me that she's Nevayot's brother? We know if she's Yishmael's daughter, she's his brother. He's her brother. And Rashi wants to, or the Megillah, excuse me, Rashi quotes this whole Gemara, but it's the Gemara Megillah wants to say that the reason it tells us that she's Nevayot's brother is because he is the one who, quote, walked her down the aisle, because Yishmael died. At this point in time, Yishmael was involved in the shidduch, and he did all the arrangements, and then he died before the wedding was held. So it was Nevayot who walked her down. Now, if Yishmael died at that point, and we know from Sukkim at the end of Chayesara, Yishmael died when he was 137, and he's 14 years older than Yitzchak, because he was born when Avram was 86. Yitzchak was born when Avram was 100, 14-year difference. That makes Yitzchak 123 when Yishmael dies. And if Yitzchak is 123, Yaakov is 63 because Yitzchak was 60 when the twins were born. So based on that, the Gemara wants to tell us that Yaakov was 63 when he got the bracha. Okay, so if there's only one little problem with that, if you go to the Megillah, then it says, wait a minute, okay, so if he was 63 and then he gets to Lavan, right? He spends 7 years Lavan working for Rachel. He spends for Rachel, gets switched to Leah. 7 more years working for Rachel. So he's there 14 years working for the two wives. At the end of that 14 years, it tells us Rachel et Yosef, when Rachel gives birth to Yosef, then Yaakov realizes it's time to go home. Why? Because he's finished the 14 years. So therefore, if we add 63 and 14, that would have made him 77 when Yosef was born. Yet when Yaakov gets to Egypt, after goes through the whole Yosef story, Yaakov gets to Egypt. Yosef brings him to Paro, and Paro says, "How old are you?" And he says, "I'm 130 years old." Which, if he was 130 and Yosef was born when he was 77, that would have made Yosef, figure it out, would have made him 53. So, well, no problem. Yosef was only 39. How do we know that Yosef was 39? Because the Torah tells us that Yosef was 30. I'm sorry for all the math here. Yosef was 30 when he stood before Paro and interpreted the dreams, followed by 7 years of famine. And it was in the second year of the famine that Yaakov and his family arrived, makes Yosef 37 plus 2, 39. And Yaakov's 130, which means Yosef wasn't born until Yaakov was 91, not 77. We got a 14-year gap, discrepancy in Yaakov's life, according to what we just said. So now, what does the Gemara say? Arba esvei shana nitman beveit midrash shel Shem ve'ever. Although one midrash says only it's Aver because Shem had died already. But Yaakov basically spent 14 years in a Beit Medrash somewhere, somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. Aver, who was one of the descendants of Shem, who was one of the ancestors of Avram and Yitzchak Yaakov, ran a yeshiva somewhere, a Beit Medrash, and Yaakov stayed there 14 years, and that's the missing 14 years. That's the Gemara in Megillah. Okay, and then he goes and he continues. Then he works for Rachel, so he's 84 when he first gets married. So therefore, we have if I accept this midrash, when he leaves after getting the bracha, when he leaves, we just said he left. He didn't leave to go to Haran. He may have, that's what Rivka thought. That's what Yitzchak thought. He didn't go directly to Haran. He did that. He did stop. He didn't go directly to Haran. He stopped for 14 years somewhere else. So now, given that, maybe we can understand. Now, but by the way, the reason he did this, at least according to Al-Shich, and Al-Shich is going to evolve that, because remember, Esav just said he wants to kill Yaakov, okay? Now, he's obviously not going to come into the house and just kill him, right? He's got to kill him where his parents aren't around and, kill him in some deserted spot, leave his body there, and who knows when it'll be found. So what is he going to do? He's not going to do. He's going to wait till he leaves. So Esav is going to wait somewhere. Okay, he's going to Padan Aram. Let's find the highway to Padan Aram. I'll wait there. I'll find a nice secluded place along it. So Yaakov basically doesn't go to Padan Aram. He goes to this yeshiva and sits there for 14 years. Okay, Lachain ma asa. What did Yaakov do? Nov datota. In other words, to basically to trick Esav, so he would give up waiting for him to kill him. He came alav at haderach. He took a different route, basically a crooked route. Halach lo be'eretz Yisrael atzma el medrash Aver litchabe shamar bo'es ve'shana. He went to the Beit Midrash of Aver to hide for 14 years, basically so Esav would stop looking for him and trying to figure out where he could ambush him and get rid of him. So the Zehu, and this is exactly why. Chazal Nitman bebeit midrasho shel Aver. Why does the use? Why does it just say halach bebeit midrasho? No, the answer is Nitman. He was hidden. He tamun me Esav hayasham. He went specifically to learn to hide himself from Esav. The Achar came Misham Nasa Harana. Then after 14 years, now he goes to Haran asher lo yada Esav and ito asher yelachbo. Because by now Esav had probably given up I'm not going to wait forever for this guy to show up. He probably gave up long before this time, and therefore Yaakov would be sick. Okay? And this will help explain our verse, which seems to imply there were two different trips. There's Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva, Echad Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva, Shlo Yerakitzi Amin Makom Asher Esav. He left Beersheva because that's where Esav was, and he didn't want Esav to find him. But Lola Lechet Charana, not directly to go to Charana, who Ashenit Mavesh Aver, he was hidden in this Beit Medrash for 14 years. The Acharechein, and after the 14 years are over, now it says Vayelech Charana, Shaita Az Alicha Lecharan B'li Yitzia mi Beersheva. Okay, so again, the reason it mentions he left and he arrived is to tell us very simply that there were two trips Yaakov took. One was to leave, but the other was the next second leaving, and then he arrives there. So even though the Torah seems to connect the two and saying it happened instantaneously, Al-Shich says based on this Gemara, we clearly see that Yaakov didn't go directly to Haran. He stopped and passed go on the way and stopped and learned yeshiva 14 years, and therefore the Torah has to split it up. That's the Al-Shich's interpretation. Okay. Now we go to Dad Zekanim. Parshat Baalei Tosfos is going to address a different issue. And it's really, again, related to this whole question of where he was going and when he was going. But it says basically, the Fichach Parsha is a stuma. Why is this Parsha closed or hidden or whatever? Neshiyatza betzina mipnei. Oh, no. Excuse me. Mipnei. Esav. In other words, he basically hid. He did not go. The Torah is hidden. The parsha is a hidden parsha or a closed parsha because Yaakov didn't reveal his whereabouts to Esav. Okay. Similarly, Balaturim says very simply, Yesh Omer Sheparsha Zustuma, that this parsha is satum. It's closed. Latam lefisha yatza b'seiter ubarach be'echaved. He left secretly and he ran away to a place of hiding. Okay, now Baltur has a very interesting comment here. Li'el minei, the last two words of Parsha Toldot before Vayaytzay, lo li'isha. Basically, Esav added machalat lo to him to be a wife. The summit le Vayaytzay Yaakov, and the next two words are Vayaytzay Yaakov, and this is almost an allusion. Balturim says sheyatza lisa isha, that Yaakov's primary reason for leaving was to find a wife, even though we might have thought from the fact that the parsha is closed that his primary reason for leaving was to hide from Esav. The answer is the primary reason he left was really to go get married. He realized it was time to get married. I don't know why he had to wait 63 years or 77 years to realize that, but that's the story. Okay. Now, Chizkuni wants to address a different issue. Why does it say Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva? Why does it have to add that whole point? And he quotes some midrashim. We're going to get into this next. So, okay. Firstly, he quotes Rashi. Rashi says, Parshato shel Yaakov shekosav v'yaresav kiverach Yitzchak v'lama hifsik shuval l'davar shvishtil sherot b'no Canaan b'nei Yitzchak halach Esav Ishmael. So here, Chizkuni wants to address why we have this repetition. We just read at the end of Toldos that he left to go to Padan Aram. Why does the Torah have to again repeat that he leaves to go to Haran? And he's saying that the reason he's quoting Rashi. Rashi quotes the fact that because we interrupted Yaakov's story by telling us that Esav went to marry Yishmael's daughter, therefore we have to return and re-pick up the thread of Yaakov's story by saying Yaakov left to go to Haran. By the way, the Torah, this is not the only point the Torah does. It repeats something specifically because it interrupted with a different story. We put something in parenthetically as a new issue, and when we get back to the main thread, which is Yaakov in this case, we have to bring the reader back to where we were in the story. So that's what Rashi's point is here, that the reason there's a repetition of Yaakov's leaving again is specifically because we interrupted it to tell us about Esav. Okay. The love of Parsha is a stuma. Why again is this Parsha Satum closed? Not because Yaakov ran away secretly, but because Yaakov has Satum b'Beit Aver. Yaakov was hidden in yeshiva for 14 years. Davar acher, another reason. Again, he hid the fact that he was leaving phrase of which is what we read before. Again, okay. Now, okay, let's continue. Now, the Od Kasav Khan. Now, again, the Chizkuni now comes to address another issue, and that issue is the proximity of Beersheva and Hebron, and where this story takes place. First, he starts with by saying Beersheva Makom Yuchad Lishvuah. The reason it's called Beersheva is because got that name because Avram and Avimelech swore about a covenant back then. But the reason it says it connects Yaakov's leaving to Beersheva, to this concept of a shvuah, Yaakov left because he was afraid that they were going to make him swear that he hadn't cheated somebody in his brachot. Interesting comment in terms of Beersheva. Now, he also says here, Beersheva makom karov lechevron haya. Obviously, Chizkuni was not an expert in the geography, although I guess if you think about it, Beersheva to Hebron, I don't know, less than an hour if you travel directly. By car, certainly, it's less than an hour if you travel directly. If you go through if you would take a direct road and there were no enemies and no things to worry about on the way, you could make it in less than an hour from Beersheva to Hebron. I don't know what the travel time was then by donkey or by foot or whatever. Okay, and he brings as a proof because the Akedah, it says, after the Akedah, it says, Vayeshev Avram bi Beersheva, even though Avram, after the Akedah, it says he lives in Beersheva, but Vatam Tzar bi Kiryat Arba hi Chevron, but Tzar dies in the Kiryat Arba Chevron. Now, if we look at Avram's life, we find that Avram, once he arrives in Eretz Yisrael, he has two primary homes, Chevron and Beersheva. And as a matter of fact, Rashi at the end of parshat Chayesora, I think, then parshat Vayera, the end of the Akedah, says that Avram actually split his time between the two, that he spent approximately 25 years living in Hebron, he spent approximately 25 years living in Beersheva, and then from then on, it seems that he goes back to Hebron, perhaps, but each of these has a period of time where Avram is living there. We know, of course, Vayita Eshel be Beersheva, Avram's famous Eshel was in Beersheva, and yet it's clear that he lives in Hebron because that's where Sarah dies. Obviously, if Sarah was living there, Avram wasn't far away. So now again, and the Ode, and a similar proof that the Avot have two different homes, Hebron and Beersheva, because here it says Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva. Yaakov leaves Beersheva, which seems to imply that Yitzchak is living in Beersheva at the time Yaakov gets the bracha. And we know that Yitzchak did spend time living in Gerar because it says Vayeshev Yitzchak b'Gerar. We read that last week's parsha. We also found that Yitzchak, after the death of Avram, is living in Be'er Lachai Roi, which is again somewhere in the Beersheva region in the northern Negev. So the fact that Yaakov and Yitzchak, Avram and Yaakov, Yitzchak and Yaakov have different places they live is not that far-fetched here. And now, although interestingly enough, in Parshat Vayishlach, when Yaakov returns after this 20-year hiatus at Lavan, and he finally decides it's time to come back home, where does he go? It says here, Vayavo Yitzchak Yaakov Yitzchak Aviv. Where does he go? Not to Beersheva, but he goes to Mamrei Kiryat Arbahi Hebron. He comes and finds Yitzchak living in Hebron when he returns from Lavan. So, why did he leave from Beersheva? Okay, so the question is, why Beersheva? So we're going to go on here. Okay. Vayaytzay Yaakov, this is Bar Ben Bechaya quoting a midrash. Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva. Yaakov left Beersheva. We have no hint anywhere in a pasuk that Yaakov was ever in Beersheva in his life before this pasuk that tells us he left from Beersheva. Why? What was he doing in Beersheva? The fact that it says Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva, after we've already read that he was on his way in the previous parsha, we already read that he left home to go to Haran. Now wait a minute, I don't know my geography says you're going from Hebron to Haran, you don't pass Beersheva on the way, because Hebron, to go to Haran, you're traveling northeast. Beersheva happens to be to the southwest of Hebron. What was he doing in Hebron if we just said that he left to go toward Haran. So, what does Rabbi Mechai say again? Quoting a midrash, Bereshit Rabbah, Mitoch Shizki Vayaytzay Atzalam Shalach L'Sham. The Vayaytzay Yaakov in Beersheva specifically to teach us that Yaakov went specifically to Beersheva on the way, even though it was not on the way. He took a detour to Beersheva. Litol Reshut Min Hashem Yisbarach, to take permission from Hashem Im Yelech LeCharan, to leave Eretz Yisrael to go to Haran. He wanted to know if he had permission from Hashem. The fact that his mother told him, his father told him, wasn't enough. Got to get permission from Hashem. Kasher Tzivu Alav Aviv Imo. His mother and father just told him to go to Haran, but he's still not enough. He's got to check with Hashem. Umishum Kvod Aviv She'Allah Mishum. Where did I go? I see where we go. Mishum Kvod Aviv She'Allah Sham Litol Reshut. But because of his father, who wanted to leave Eretz Yisrael and went to Beersheva to get permission to leave Eretz Yisrael, that's why. And that was where Hashem promised Yitzchak that if he, not to worry, he shouldn't leave, even though there was a famine, don't leave Eretz Yisrael, stay here and everything will be okay. Here in Eretz Plishtim, in Beersheva, in the south of Eretz Yisrael, things will be okay. V'chein darshu Chazal and Bereshit Rabbah Amar Yaakov Kishem Shalach Abba li Beersheva. Just like Abba went to Beersheva to get permission to leave Eretz, whether he should leave Eretz Yisrael or not. Kach ani hareini holech li Beersheva. I'm going to Beersheva. Im yitain li reshut hareini yotzei v'im lav eini yotzei. If Hashem says okay, I'll go. If not, I can't go. Okay, so the Dan and Rabbeinu Bechaya adds, "V'da, you should know, ki lulei sheratza litom hakadosh baruch hu reshut." If he hadn't gone there to ask Hashem permission, hayurah katz lomar vayaytzay Yaakov michevron. Hisham gar Avram v'Yitzchak b'sham natal brachot. Rabbeinu Bechaya says, no doubt about it, that Yitzchak was living in Hebron, and Yaakov would have left from Hebron after getting the brachot, had it not been for the fact that he went to Beersheva to get permission to leave. Nice grouping of Beersheva versus Hebron, because it's always a question: where did Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov live, Beersheva or Hebron? And the answer is yes, both. Okay. Now, Vayaytzay Yaakov Beersheva. Okay. Now, Rashi, going back, we already quoted the first Rashi that because the basic reason, the simple pshat reason why the Torah repeats Vayaytzay Yaakov was because we had this break about Esav. But now, Rashi adds another interesting insight here. Vayaytzay Yaakov Beersheva. Yaakov left. Lo yatzorech lichtov ela vayelech Yaakov Harana. Why did the pasuk again return and say Vayaytzay where he left from? Why did it just say, okay, we interrupted the story to tell you when Yaakov was on his way to Haran, tell you about Esav. Just tell us now he went to Haran. Vayaytzay Haran. He went to go to Haran. Why the Vayaytzay? The Lama is Kir Yitziato. Why does it mention that he left? Elamagi Chiyatzia Tzadik Minamakom Osa Roshem. When a tzaddik, when a righteous person leaves a place, his absence is felt. It's a very interesting and powerful lesson that we I guess everybody feels when certain people are not there. Shebizman Tzaddik Po'ir, when Rashi adds, again, this is all quoted from the Midrash, when a tzaddik lives in a city, who hodah, he is its glory, who is ziva, its pride, its adara, its beauty. Yatza misham, when he leaves, panahada, panaziva, panadara. And similarly, he brings another place of where somebody is quoted as the Torah or the Navi. In this case, it's the book of Ruth, where it says, "Vayaytzay min hamakom ha'nami amur b'na'ami in Ruth." When Naomi leaves Moab to return home to Eretz Yisrael, it says Vayaytzay. She left the place, rather than just saying that she traveled to Eretz Yisrael. It says she left the place she was living. Again, Rashi wants to say, and quoting the Midrash, that this teaches us that when a person leaves, it makes a dent. It makes a mark. Okay. So we have to understand this. Now, the Sifsei Chachamim is going to try to explain this whole concept of what does it mean when somebody leaves a dent, okay? And he brings a very interesting question. Rashi says Rashi is using circular reasoning. Why? Kasha, here's the question. The Hacha Here in our verse, Hevi Raya Mehatam Lakan, he brings this other verse in Ruth as a proof to here. Vahatam Gabi Nami Ruth Hevi Raya Mikan. There he uses our verse as a proof there. So which is the proof for which? Okay. But Yeshlam, but he gives an answer to the Elo Hevi Raya Mehatam. If we only had one of these two psukim, so in other words, if I only had the puzzle Vayaytzay Yaakov mi Beersheva, Hayiti Omer, Dilma Shtei Yitzir Mort Khan, the reason that it mentions that he left multiple times here, Bali Ashmoinan de Achat Yitziot Gufa v'Achat Yitziot Memona v'Tzonu B'Kar Shiatuima. One is to tell us that he physically left. The other is to tell us that he took a lot of stuff with him. It's not to tell us that this concept of it creates a mark in the city, well, something is missing in the city. We would have said one is to tell us that he left, the other tells us that he didn't leave empty-handed, he took stuff with him. Okay, therefore it brings a raya from the case of Naami, because we know that the Hatam Yeshul Farshal Yitziat Mimonim, because there we can't say that it specifically mentions that she's leaving to tell you that she left not alone, but with a whole bunch of stuff. The Hatam over there, it says, Shivani Hashem, she left empty-handed. Even though she went to Moav rich, she left empty-handed. So therefore, Shmami Nashlo Yela Shuma moment, she had nothing. So therefore, that verse, the fact that Nami left proves that here it's not talking about Yaakov's possessions that he's taking with him when he's leaving, but it's to teach us that a righteous person's absence is felt. Now, over there, when we get to the story of Nami and Ruth, there it uses our verse as a proof. Why? Because the Ime Hatam Have Amina. If the story there, I would say why. You know why it makes a difference. There in the story of Naomi, it makes a difference. Why? Once Naomi and Ruth left, there was nobody of any spiritual value left in the city. So it clearly would have been recognizable. If you take the only righteous person in the city out, there it would make sense. But of Magdam Tzadikim, but if there are other righteous people left behind, how do I know that it makes a difference? So therefore, there in the case of Nami and Ruth, it uses our verse. Why? Yitzchak and Rivka were left behind. So why does it? So we know that you can't say that, the reason over there it made an impact was because there was nobody else left. We see even here with Yaakov, it uses that same word Vayaytzay, even though there are tzaddikim left behind. The Kalav, and this is very interesting, and then he brings down. Okay, now, Kleakar takes this whole theory that we just talked about. What does it make a difference whether you leave somebody behind, whether you don't leave somebody behind? How does it? Let's read what Kleakar says on this whole issue here. Okay? Go ahead. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
First of all, why 14 years? Secondly, how do we take place? Rivka knew about it all the time. Maybe he went to Shem Be'eva, and it doesn't say to learn Torah. Maybe he went to Shem Be'eva because he wanted to be sure he was going to love and how to deal with them. Because Shem lived in such a time when he did the Durham Marvel and Ava.
Okay.
So how do we do it was to hide? If it's to hide, why 14 years for that?
Why 14 years? Great question. I have no idea. Because the mashmot is they're missing 14 years in this lot. There's this 14-year gap. Why did Yaakov? I mean, the Gemara in Megillah is really trying to reconcile the question. Okay, how old was Yaakov when he got the brachot? And we know that he's 130 when he gets to. I mean, they could have just easily said he was 77 when he got the brachot, and there's no 14 years missing. Okay, but it's bothered by the fact that there's these two words, achot nevayot, that are totally out of place. Why does the Torah have to tell us that she's Nevayot's brother? And that she's Nevayot's sister. I'm sorry. Nevayot is her brother, right? Why do we need that? Okay? And so the Torah's is the Midrash is taking those two things. One, that we don't really know. We know that we don't know anything about how old Yaakov was. First time Yaakov's age is mentioned in the Torah is when he's 130 years old. When he stands to Pharaoh and he says 130 years old. Now, I can make those numbers work out any way I want. right? But the Midrash is saying, wait a minute, something doesn't add up here.
Yeah.
Why? Because why does it have to tell us about Yishmael? And why does the Torah care? Normally, we know the Torah tells us days of people, how old they are when they die, if there's a specific reason. Yishmael is the outlier. Okay, we know how old Avram is when he died. We know Yitzchak when he was. We know Yaakov was when he dies. Okay, but Yishmael, why do we need to know how old Yishmael was when he died? And that's the Gemara saying, why did the Torah bother telling us that? Who cares? Why do we care? Do we know how old Haran is when he dies? Lod is when he dies. We understand the main characters in the thread. If we go through the 10 generations from Adam to Noah, the 10 generations from Avram, we know how old they were when they died. We don't know anybody else in those whole 20 generations how old they were, except those 20 people, because we don't care. What we care about is this thread, and it goes to Avram, to Yitzchak, to Yaakov. Shmuel's off that beaten path. Why do we need to know how old he was? So the Torah seems to be trying to tell us something. That's Gemara and Megillah. Why does the Gemara and Megillah make that assumption? I don't know. It wants to make Yaakov look like he was doing something with his life. I don't know. I have no idea whether this was based on an oral tradition handed down or whether it's specifically a drash based on Pesukim. I don't know. That's one of the things about Midrash. You never know whether it's a Midrash that's there to answer a specific question or it's a Midrash to teach us. I think, I'll be perfectly honest with you, the Midrash there wants to teach a specific lesson. Okay, whether it's meant to be taken literally or figuratively, I don't know. But the specific lesson the Midrash wants to teach there, and the Gemara in Megillah says it very clearly, that for Yaakov is away from his father. He's not Mekayim of Kibbutz Avim for 36 years. 14 that he's learning Torah, 22 that he's going getting a wife and traveling. Okay, and the Torah says that if we look at Yosef, we find that Yosef is away from his father for 22 years. So he's punished for not being Mekayim Kibbutz Avim, but only 22 years, not the whole 36. So now again, were there really 36 years, or did the Midrash invent the 36 years? Great question. I don't have an answer. But the Midrash, quote, invented that 14 years to teach us the lesson that you don't get punished if you go and sit and learn yeshiva. You don't get punished for not being Mekayim Kibbutz Avim. That's the point of that Midrash. And it says it, and that's what the Gemara begins with. That, Gadol Talmud Torah Kibbutz Avim, because for the 14 years he was learning, he didn't get punished. He only got punished for the 22 years that he was gone, that he was missing, and was not Mekayim Kibbutz Avim, even though it was his parents who sent him away. So I don't know how the Gemara says that he wasn't Mekayim Kibbutz Avim. I mean, he wasn't physically, and really shouldn't be punished for the whole 22, because certainly they sent him away for part of that to at least get a wife. Now, how long it takes to get a wife, I don't know. Eliezer, Avram Zeva did it in one day. Eliezer did it in one day, according to the Midrash. But Yaakov obviously took a little longer. It took him 14 years. 7 years twice to do it. I don't think he intended it to take him 14 years. He intended to take him 7. But that's another whole story for another whole time. So why does and by the way, it's not Shem and Aver, even though it uses throughout, it says Shem and Aver. Shem dies before Yaakov is 63. Aver lives till Yaakov is 79. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's 79. Yaakov is 79 when Aver dies, if you do the math. But Shem had died already. But even though, let's say, Rivka knew where it was, that doesn't necessarily mean Esav knew where it was. I don't think Esav was scouring, I mean, the impression we have of Esav is he wasn't going around looking for Batei Midrashim and knowing all their locations, find a Beit Medrash, find this, whatever. I don't know. Yes. Yaakov finds it's important. Yes, even though, now remember, Yaakov is spent. Let's take the Midrash, the Gemara at face value. Yaakov is 63 years old. He has spent the first 63 years of his life sitting in the Beit Medrash of Yitzchak, the Gadol Hador. Why does he have to go to Shem and Aver? Great question, and I'll give you an answer based on, I don't know where this is based on. It's based on Rashi in parshat Vayaytzay, that when it says that Yaakov that when it says about Yosef, ki ven zikunim hu lo, Rashi says, what is ven zikunim? He was the Bar Hakim. He was the one who Yaakov taught all the Torah. But what Torah did he teach him? He taught him the Torah that he learned from Shem and Aver. And Rashi there used Shem and Aver, even though it really should just say Aver. Okay, why? you're right. Yaakov had to go there for 14 years to learn the Torah of Galut, because he spent 63 years learning the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, because Yitzchak never had to go into Galut. Avram did. Yitzchak did, and that's exactly what he's teaching Yosef. Why? Because he sees prophetically that Yosef is going to be the first one to go into Galut. And he's going to need these specific lessons of dealing with the world. That's all of Midrash based on all these parshanot, okay? That why Dafka does he go there for 14 years? Because before you deal with Lavan, you need you need chizuk in how to deal with a Lavan. But I think you also need chizuk in how to deal with the rest of the world. But I don't understand. See, if you think about it, what was he learning from Yitzchak all this time? Because Avram and Yitzchak, even though they were living in Eretz Yisrael, they were still in foreign territory just as much as we Jews have been in foreign territory throughout all of the different places we're in Golah. Because before we get here under Yeshua and establish a country, this is just as much not our home as anywhere else on the globe. Whereas after Yeshua gets here, and that's a different story. Now we already have Eretz Yisrael as ours. But even Avram is Ger Toshav. He says, Yitzchak Vayeshev, Yitzchak Migor, and he has to rely on Avimelech. Avimelech kicks him out. He lets him back in. He doesn't want. So clearly, the Avot have not established a presence in. I mean, they've established an awareness in Eretz Yisrael. People are aware of them, aware of their existence. Avimelech clearly is aware. People in Shechem were clearly aware of them, but they're not the owners of the land yet. Yeah, they own this one little piece in Hebron, and Yaakov is 22 years later, when he comes back, is going to buy a little piece in Shechem. But other than that, they don't. It's not like they are in charge of Eretz Yisrael politically or economically or in any way, shape, or form. So from that perspective, why is there a difference in the Torah of Eretz Yisrael versus the Torah of Galut? I don't know. But that's the Midrash. That's what the Midrash wants to say. Okay? Okay. I want to just finish with Klei Akar, who has another whole different way of looking at this whole difference of when does it make a difference when a tzaddik leaves the city or not. Okay? Perish okay, first his question is, we know that Avram and Yitzchak also traveled. Why don't we have the same concept of Yitzia, that they left the place and it made an impact when they left by Avram and Yitzchak? Yesh panim lekan ulekan. He says we can look at this from two different perspectives. Okay, that here it specifically wants to add something. Why? Avram and Yitzchak, when they left the place, there was nobody of their caliber, nobody of their stature left behind. So obviously their absence was felt because the people saw, nobody over here now anymore. Aval Khan, here in the case where Yaakov is leaving, Hara Yitzchak Verishka Nisharusham. Yitzchak and Rivka are still there. We would have thought, so what? Okay, so Yaakov's leaving, big deal. We got Yitzchak here. What do we? We're okay. No. I might have thought, therefore I would have thought his leaving doesn't make a difference. Kamash Milan comes to each other that it does. Okay, he brings a proof from this from Ruth. Umaksha, and he asks a question. Again, this is Sham Nicha the Taman lo haitokim also tzadeket. It makes sense when Ruth leaves because there was nobody else there. Elahacha havet Yitzchak v'Rivka. Rabbi Azariah Omer Einu Dam Zechuto Shel Tzadik Echad L'Shnei Tzadikim. Okay. However, we can't compare when there are two tzaddikim in a place to when there's one tzaddik. I don't know why it doesn't say 3 to 2, because Rivka I would think would also should be included. But again, I guess Yitzchak and Rivka Ishto are considered as one, so it only lists 2. Okay, that's why he says, "Oh, tzaddik echad lishnei tzaddikim." Okay, but however, he says the Klei Akar says I can look at it in the other perspective. Lomar to say the following: Shedavka Yitziaso Shel Yaakov Oser Roshim. When Avram and Yitzchak left place, it didn't make a difference because nobody cared. Whereas here, when Yaakov leaves, Avaloitzi is Avram Yitzchak Hema Holchuim B'nei Beitam V'lo Nishar Makom Shum Tzadik. They didn't leave anybody behind who it would impact. In other words, what does it impact if somebody who is a tzaddik leaves? Another tzaddik, another person who had a tzaddik to interact with. But the regular people, they don't care. People who are wicked, they don't care if tzaddikim leave. They're very happy when the people leave. We don't need this stranger, this guy who's always begging, bothering us, shepherding us to do more mitzvahs. Who needs him? Great, he's gone. Now we can go back to our regular way of living. We don't need him. Fine. Because they're always giving me mussar. I don't need somebody giving me mussar all the time. But a person who leaves where there are other tzaddikim back there, the people who are left behind, they feel that this person left because it's hard to say goodbye to this person. Because I, as a tzaddik, I am elevated by the presence of another tzaddik in my midst, because we can work together, we can learn together, we can do mitzvot together, we can feed off each other. Just like we know that when there's a vast difference between sitting and learning Torah alone, sitting Torah with a chavruta, because you bounce ideas off each other, and through that you arrive at a better understanding of everything. And another example he gives us is the case, we know that multitude of tzaddikim, you can't compare their merit to a single tzaddik, as we see in the case of Avram with Sodom. Avram says, hey, there are 50 people. Wow, we can save all 5 cities. We can save the whole region, even if there are 50 people. So a multitude of tzaddikim is much more powerful than a single tzaddik, the power of a minyan. Why do we have to have a minyan for certain things? Because we know that more the merrier. And since here Yitzchak and Rivka are left behind, it's recognizable. Well, if he's that now, but he goes back now. Wait a minute. There's only one little problem with that. Then why do we have the same thing with Naomi and Ruth when they leave Moab? Who felt their difference? If you want to accept this interpretation, even Moab had a few righteous people who felt that when Naomi left, they felt her, they missed her, felt her missing. Okay, that was all that. Okay. Now, then he brings down one final thought, and it's just an interesting thought from the Midrash. The Kli Yakar ends with the following thought. That he brings down the following interesting thought. There are times when a man sits home and waits for his wife to come to him. And there are times when guy's got to go out and find his wife. Yaakov had to go find his mate. How can Yaakov say that when the reason he was leaving was really to run away from Esav? That would be a question if it said only Vayaytzay Yaakov. But Vayelech, in fact, this is Vayelech Miboile, teaches us that Yaakov had to leave to go to find a shidduch. Okay, and we see, and on the other case we find with Yitzchak that Yitzchak waits for his shidduch to be brought to him, and that's the other half of this pasuk. Okay. 1 minute. Okay. Now we get back to the 22 years and the whole question here. We can ask the following question: why was he punished for those whole 22 years? The Kli Yakar wants to say was because Vayaytzay Yaakov Beersheva means, I'm going to say this out loud because my time is running out, means that Vayaytzay Yaakov, he put Beersheva out of his mind. He left. He realized, I'm going to find a wife. I got to forget the past. I got to leave the past behind and move on with my new life. And that's why he's punished for the whole time, even though he was leaving with his parents' reshut. By the way, this is the exact opposite of other parshanim, and I don't remember who it was. I saw it, but I didn't have a chance to put it in here. That the reason, I'm going to go back to what we started with. The reason it's one single paragraph in the Torah is because Hafuch, Yaakov, throughout this whole episode, had one thought in mind, and that was to get back home, back to Eretz Yisrael, where he knew he belonged. He knew he was going into his own private galut. He didn't want it to be any longer than it had to be, and he always focused on coming home. So interesting that the parshanim, as I said, you go through the parsha, you find all sorts of different ways of approaching Yaakov's leaving and arrival at Haran. But as I said, all of this stems from the fact that it seems superfluous to go through this Vayaytzay Yaakov Beersheva Vayelech Harana when we were already told that at the end of last week's parsha. That's where all of this really begins with. And so lots of different ways of looking at it and lots of lessons that we can learn in terms of how we go about choosing where we are, where we go to, how we go to, when we go to. So I hope we had so everybody got something out of this, and I hope you all have a good rest of the week. And I open it up at this point for comments, feedback, questions. Anybody? Nobody? Go ahead. Anybody? Okay, so have a good rest of the week, everyone. And B'ezras Hashem, we'll see you next week, same time, same place, same Zoom.
Thank you. Good night.
Lila Tova.